I'm going to run some polls while we let everyone get to their seats. Welcome, everybody. Uh, let's start with a couple polls here. Which DAW do you primarily use? We couldn't include all of them. Ableton, Logic, Studio One, Pro Tools, or other. Putting the kids to bed. I know that well. We'll talk quietly. Okay. Ableton Live, number one. Some Logic Pro and Studio One is really growing. No Pro Tools yet today. Okay, cool. Um, what kind of music do you usually work on? And some Bitwig, of course. Marco, Bitwig. Bitwig sounds good. I like Bitwig. Cubase, that's me. All right, everyone voted. Up-tempo electronic and also down-tempo. Quite a bit of both. Good. Awesome. Uh here's a little soul searching. Do you consider yourself to be a beginner, an intermediate, advanced, or guru? To boot camp today, so we're going back to basics, but it's good for even gurus. Okay. Uh, Intermediate 52%, advanced 43%. 4% beginners, and no gurus. Gurus soon. Gurus to be. Okay. Um, which plugins do you use most often? Soundtoys, FabFilter, Isotope, UAD, or other? What's up, Justin? And yes, Slate. Slate should be in there. What's up, Andy? Uh, yeah, Slate. Can't fit them all in. Okay. Lots of sound toys, lots of Fab Filter, Isotope as well, some UAD, and 54% other. I know it's Slate and Waves and all kinds of good stuff. Okay. Uh, how about this one? If you can remember, how did you hear about us? Google, Facebook, Twitter, word of mouth, or other? Other. Okay. Google, some Facebook, no Twitter. I know Twitter isn't big for us. I don't know. Friend and word of mouth, we love that. And then other. If you put other Mac Pro Video, okay, good. A couple, okay. Any yes, last Christmas from Soundtoys, okay. Yeah, if you're an other, put your other in the chat. It's good to know. We like to know if you're other on that one. Okay, a few more. Are you interested in composition, sound design, or mixing and mastering? And we teach all of those actually. Vote, vote, vote. And you can do one or more. Doesn't have to be one. 100% mixing and mastering. Thank you. That's why you're here. 62% sound design and 69% composition. Good. Those are, they all work together. That's what we were finding. Okay, a few more. Uh, is this your first Mixmaster Wyatt experience? 20% new. Wonderful. Welcome. Good, good. Welcome new people. And then for return people, fantastic. Great to see you. Webinaristas. Okay. Just a few more. Well, actually, two more. Would you be interested in advanced production courses? Advanced production in Logic, advanced production in Studio One. Not showing you how to use your DAW because you're all intermediate and advanced, but just taking one of the DAWs and getting very advanced with production. A 1 month course, we were thinking. Tell me if this would interest you at all. 1 month course, 1 day a week. Okay. And finally, because you guys get to vote, which free webinar? Yeah, the materials list won't work until I present it. It doesn't work independently. It will never work like that. It only works if I show it. Which free webinar would you like to attend next? A DAW shootout of mixing and mastering, our opinion of the best DAWs, a sound design bootcamp, a modern composition bootcamp, mixing with Slate plugins, or mixing with UAD plugins. So vote for one or more. Okay, yeah, I have big passion for Slate, so we can easily do that. Okay. Close poll. Modern composition bootcamp wins. There's a lot of interest in composition right now. I can really see that. That's awesome. Okay, fantastic. Okay. Let's jump right in. Thank you for answering those. We always like to get those done in 10 minutes or less. Can you see my screen? Can you see Logic? Yes, yes, yes. Okay. So this is a EQ bootcamp. And EQ is like one of the most basic and fundamental things. It's also one of the most powerful things. And in our school, we have two sides of the coin, two branches of the tree. We do reductive EQ, and we're very almost religious about that, to take out bad frequencies that don't need to be there, that don't help the integrity of that sound. They don't make that sound speak. And they actually, if there's excessive frequencies that don't need to be there, they get in the way of the other frequencies, right? We want to think of frequency bands as almost being like runways where planes get to take off. And you want to sort of have certain planes working in certain runways, but not have their garbage occupying the other runway, right? We've all had a experience where you push up a certain element in a mix and it doesn't get louder. I think everyone's had that. I'm sure, at least on kicks and basses, you push them up, fader up, and they don't get louder. It's usually because there's congestion in the mix. And that means that unwantedly, unbeknowingly, other elements are occupying that space without meaning to. So one of the things we do quite religiously is cut lows, cut highs, and also nodes in the middle that are occupying a certain space that are unmusical resonances, right? We love harmonics because harmonics are musical resonances based on the fundamental of the sound, right? Analog is incredible. When it distorts, it actually distorts usually in, octaves and fifths and harmonically related intervals to the fundamental. Digital distortion is not the same, right? When digital distorts, it's sort of a function of the sample rate, and it sounds terrible. So our favorite EQ for reductive EQ is Pro Q2 from FabFilter. And I see that lots and lots of people are using Pro Q2. When it comes to additive EQ, our first step is always we do reductive EQ first. We take out all the bad stuff. But then the other flip side of EQing, which is fun, is additive EQ. And additive EQ is, really taking the sound and highlighting a certain part of it, bringing out the highs, bringing out the lows, bringing out the middle. And it's fun, right? We don't always know what's going to sound really good. We have to sometimes sort of play with it. So let's take a look here on our EQ bootcamp, next 45 minutes or so, and we'll leave some time for questions. Of just sort of the concept of additive EQ. And additive EQs for us are usually musical EQs. They usually have saturation. Neutron is a whole nother conversation. We'll talk about that. So now, I think the most important thing to realize about sort of the history of EQ is, EQ equalizing sort of had a corrective connotation at first. It usually was sort of developed to correct mic placement. If something was too close and we wanted to move it back, we take away high frequencies. If something was too far away and we wanted to bring it forward, we'd use what they call presence EQ, or bring up the mid-range to bring something forward. So it almost after the fact, after a recording, sort of allowed you to, in a sense, move the mics around. But after the corrective stage of EQ, it actually became very popular to use it very, very creatively. And, in the analog days, they worked so hard to make things clean. And, they were like, oh, I wish this EQ wouldn't color things as much. But ironically, as soon as, they created clean, clear digital EQs, all people wanted to do was get that color back and that musicality. So in our school, we use both. We use clean, clear digital EQ, where you can make any shape you want and you can see what's going on. And then we use fun musical EQs that have saturation. And they also sometimes have fixed frequencies, which in boosting is kind of cool. It's kind of cool in these digital vintage EQs to have your choices constrained a little bit. You get to say, do I like this or do I like this? Or do I like this or do I like this? And you get to sort of flick between frequencies. And also some of the musical shapes of these musical EQs are very user-friendly. They're hard to sort of make sound bad in a way. So we're going to look at the CQ. I didn't know if it was PsyQ or CQ, but I texted Mitch from Sound Toys, and he promised me that it was CQ. And he said if you were German, it could be ZQ, but I think we're going to call it CQ. So here's our CQ, and here's our Pro Q2. And so basically, Pro Q2 comes as a blank slate, as we know. There's, within any kind of EQing, there's a little bit of distortion inherent in it. And so phase distortion management happens down here. In analog EQs, you get what you get. You don't really have a choice. But in digital EQ, it can do zero latency, natural phase, or linear phase. And for the most part, and it's a sort of a different conversation, linear phase is really for EQing two signals that have a inherent phase relationship. But for the most part, to minimize phase distortion when EQing, and all EQs really have a certain amount of phase distortion, natural phase is the choice. When you click on when you want to create a point here, you click on the line, and your choices are here: bell, low shelf, low cut, high shelf, high cut, notch, bandpass, and tilt shelf. And so if you go to these shelves, they default to, we'll add 3 dB here. Well, actually, we'll add a little bit more, 4 dB. They default to Baxandall shape. And the Baxandall shape is like your home stereo. It has a shoulder, if you think about it, someone lying sideways on a bed. And that shoulder goes up and then it flattens out. Now, for reductive EQ, the low shelves are really cool. So if we go, instead of adding 4 dB, we subtract 4 dB. And this is a really nice, gentle way to do reductive EQ on the low end. Right, here's the shoulder, and it drops off and it flattens out. So it sort of retains the integrity of the sound, but carves out a nice little piece there. Now, as an additive EQ, like I said, we use analog style EQs. The problem with boosting with a low shelf, it does work, of course, but it's usually best to combine it with a low cut. And so what this does is it makes this kind of a round flat shape. And because if we boost in the lows or the highs out into infinity, we get these extra super subs and super highs, and those are actually not good. We typically don't want to do that. So shelves work very good reductively, but additively, even in the high shelf here, we may want to highlight this frequency of the sound, but we probably don't want these crazy, all this very, very upper harmonic stuff. It could be noise. So when we're boosting with shelves, it's very typical to combine them also with a high cut so that we don't extend way, way, way far past the Nyquist curve. In the center, we use bells to do reductive EQ. And usually, we don't want to go too extreme, You want to make a nice cut, but you don't need to cut it like this and cut a huge hole out of it. Also here there is bandpass filters, which are extreme, right? And notch filters. But we use those sort of with sound toys almost creatively. But in terms of reductive EQ, it's not typical that we'll make such an extreme cut like that. And then in the reductive EQ department, when we EQ a sound, we usually start from low to high. And so the first question on a sound is, would I want a low shelf or a low cut? A low cut is more extreme. And here, if we play with the Q, we can play with the shape. As we push this up, this becomes a resonant low cut, which is cool for kick drums. And we can sort of change the shape here. We can also, so that changes the shape. We can also do how many dB per octave, 18, 12, whatever. So then the next question would be, with our low cut, do we want a low shelf as well? And they can work together. So a low cut can really do a rumble cut off the super low frequencies. And then the low shelf reductive will be sort of like a modifier of the low cut and can sort of create some interesting shapes, right? So it's a shelf being typically more gentle. If we go to the low cut and we turn it off, we can see here, well, let's go back to clean, that once we've established our low cut, if we go to the low shelf here and we cut it minus 3 dB, this Q changes the shape of the shelf. As we push the Q up, we get a resonant low shelf. Pultecs do this. It's kind of interesting. resonant shelves. They give you a little boost before the cut, or on the flip side, we can pull the EQ the other way, and we could get this interesting sort of nonlinear analog shape that extends way up into the mid-range and can be very, very, very gentle. So we have different shape low cuts and different shape shelves. And then we will also good here. We will also be able to take out resonances in the mid-range. Within Pro Q2, if you hit this icon here, this headphone, you can listen inside the bandpass. And sometimes we will do this. And the other more ghetto kind of old school thing is just to do a boost, make it not too narrow, not too wide, and then sweep the frequency of that boost to make things sound as terrible as possible. Once you find something you hate, you'll cut it. Now, reductive EQ on the high end works the same way. Most of the time, if there's excessive mid-range, in our school, we tend to control that with de-essing most of the time. But the two big moves on the high end, and we do reductive EQ on the lows and the highs, is two choices you would ask yourself. Do I need a high cut rather? And we can click that Q there. And then you can dial this back, and then of course do these, the steepness or the poles, how many dB per octave, 12 dB being typical. And then of course you can also make it a resonant high cut, which is very rare, kind of hurts the ears, or a more gentle, almost shelving shape. Also, the high shelf can be also reductive as well. And this is very, very useful, and I'll exaggerate it here. But this is very, very useful because it has sort of a gentle tapering off. If there's high frequency, ultra high frequency content that you like, you can keep it and retain it. And it's, so this is more gentle. And you can use a high cut and a reductive high shelf together to make very, very interesting shapes. So that's the sort of the basics of the shapes that we use. And again, the workflow that we use is we go from low to high, taking out things that we think either that sound doesn't need, or we need that real estate for another sound. A couple cool things, two little cool things before we move on. There's a phase flip here for those who are working on acoustic things. There's also this interesting auto gain where you're allowed to boost and cut EQ with gain compensation. Anybody who knows me knows that I don't really stress too hard about having the gain compensation be exactly perfect, just because the nature of the sound is really changing. But certainly you can you can play with that. I don't usually use it. Here is the master bypass of all the plugins, and a gain scale. There's an output level to prevent output clipping, and then there is a mid-side widening pan on the outer dial. So there's lots and lots of equipment here to use inside this really wonderful visual reductive EQ. You can also do what they have in new isotope neutron, which is sort of see where what they call collision or traffic is, by sending this sidechain, by having an external sidechain, you get to see two signals and where the silhouettes of the EQs and where they have traffic, and you can cut them, which is very, very useful and something that FabFilter had actually been doing for a while there. So you're able to use that sort of take the external sidechain input of a sound and see the two sounds dancing together and where that traffic is. Okay, so that is a quick reductive EQ sort of explanation of Pro Q2, and I'll leave time at the end for questions. But because we're a bit limited on time, I want to jump straight to the CQ, and then we'll take questions at the end. Um, so all you Sound Toys fans, we're always happy when we get a new sound toy, and we're always looking for new tools to put in the effect rack, just to beef it up and to give us more power and a little more flexibility. So here is, I think, Sound Toys' really first dedicated EQ in their history. Radiator has a shelving on it, but the CQ is, I think, really the first EQ. And it came out of these consoles. Let's see where this is here. It came out of this 1960s German Siemens console. And this, I think, was very popular for broadcast, but also film work. And the rumor is that the Beatles did a lot of their film work on this console of this type. And so the W295 EQ module is what the Ken from Sound Toys used to model this EQ. And the concept is that it's a musical EQ, and it also has saturation. Like we said, in our system, we love our saturation, and so do Sound Toys. And we love our EQs to have flavor and saturation. And within the world of musical analog saturation, there's really sort of two main flavors. There's even ordered harmonics, and there's odd ordered harmonics. And even ordered harmonics, I always say, are kind of warm and fuzzy. And odd ordered harmonics are kind of what I would call sharp and buzzy. And you end up with a little bit of both when you saturate things, because you usually don't end up with one kind of saturation. A tape machine is really primarily odd ordered harmonics when you look at it on a meter, which is what we're going to do in a second. Tubes are primarily even and odd. Very few things are perfectly even ordered harmonics. A couple algorithms that I've seen that were digital, but I haven't found that much analog gear that was pure even ordered harmonics. So one of the things, and again, a lot of the Sound Toys, there's always multiple levels of saturation, multiple different kinds of tonal controls. So I thought it would be cool for us, because we have this cool webinar, to sort of take a look at the saturation of Sound Toys and see exactly what's going on there. So I'm going to open a new tab in your browser. And people, if you're on an iPad or a phone, this is not going to necessarily work for you. But if you're on a computer, you will be able to see and hear. If you can't, just say I can't see or hear, but look for a new tab in your browser. And Mike Hooks, who's helping us today from Moscow, our Chief Technology Officer, will help you in the chat as well. Okay, good. So let's take a look at what this saturation looks like. Hold on. Okay, actually, okay. I'm gonna have to reload that one in a second. But let's look at CQ in action here. And we have a low band, we have a mid band, and we have a high band. And the low band is a shelf and has a little resonance to it. Let's see here. Can you guys see, before we listen, can you guys see the CQ picture here? You able to see that? Okay, good. So it's a little bit funny, because in the manual it says here, cutting produces a low shelf shape, which is right. And and we can see that the low shelf is actually just sort of almost a musically curved low shelf. The boosting has a little bit of a resonant shelf. You can see that there's a little bit of a dip there before the boost. And that's almost like that Pultec thing where right before the boost, it cuts out a little bit. People say it cuts out a little bit of mud, which is cool. But then it raises up and it goes off into infinity or there with a little bit of taper down. Well, we can see that the meat of the boost is sort of around 200 or so. And if you think about the muddy zone of EQ, you think of the mud as being 300, 400, 500, 600. So if you notice that the boosting here happens below the mud, and that is very, very much on purpose. If the boost actually boosts some 300 and some 400, you might be boosting mud. So the lift here, and we're using this as mostly a boosting EQ, happens actually sort of below that muddy thing, and it puts a solid sub for you that's actually quite nice. Now, if we look at the high boost, similar kind of thing, both sort of analog shelving sort of looking shapes, and there's no real resonance in the high end. But if you look, sort of the meat of the boost sort of happens around, I don't know, in that right above the upper mids, the 6K, 7K, 7K, 5K zone is where the real volume starts to kick in here. And this is also very much on purpose because the mid-range, just like the mud, the mid-range can be harsh, and we want to control that very consciously and very, very much separately. So the fact that you can brighten things up north of or above the mid-range makes it very musical and very useful and kind of like hard to make it sound bad. And we can now get to the mid-range with this curve here, and you can see that it's got this sort of auto cue thing where if you're doing a little bit of a boost, it's very wide. A small boost narrow probably doesn't make a lot of difference, but a small boost wide lifts up that general area. And then as you boost up and up, it naturally narrows. But this wide mid-range boost is another design of this EQ to be non-harsh, right? The low frequency was designed to be non-muddy. The shelf was designed to boost above the upper mids, although include a little bit. And then this mid-range helps you sort of do gentle boosts in the mid-range. But we all know getting the mid-range right is critical, right? Okay, so now let's go back to our video. And this was a shootout that we did between the UAD Chandler and the CQ, but let's look at the CQ portion of it. And the first thing I'm going to do is just do the saturation. And we'll see if I can get that video to work. I don't know, it's stalled a little bit. But the punchline of the story, and there's a YouTube video you can watch. It's actually on the YouTube video on our channel that we just posted. If you want to see the saturation portion, it's in there. But now, so what we're doing is we look at the drive, and we boost the drive. The drive does a boost in front of the EQ, and it adds a very musical, even and odd ordered harmonic distribution. So it almost has a little bit of a tube profile if you look at the saturation. And it's up to you whether you like to saturate first and then EQ, or EQ first and then saturate. I think they both have their merits. In our system, typically, we like to saturate first and then do additive EQ after the saturation. And the concept there is, saturation creates new energy. EQ moves energy around. So it seems oftentimes more logical to create the energy and then use the EQ to gently shift the energy around than to try to shift and make an energy pattern and then you enrich it by saturation. Sometimes it doesn't work as well. So typically we like to saturate first, then do reductive EQ, and then do additive EQ as a final part of our channel strip. Having created this energy, moving it around a little bit. So let's listen to the saturation. To get the saturation, all you have to do is push the drive, and there's a lot of headroom that happens before it crunches out. And our victim today, our sound, is a techno track from one of our students in Holland. And you see here, we're crunching it out on purpose, right? John, you guys are not getting sound either? Okay, hold on. Let's do this. I'll open up a new sound in the browser. Okay. It's not responding. Give us 1 second here. It was working great. All right, let me try one more thing. You can push play and you can see and hear everything, but I can't. So that's bad. Hold on 1 second, you guys. Don't go anywhere. Hmm. Okay, I'm having a technical problem. I'm going to try one more thing. Just chill for a second and let me see if I can get this working.
Muted.
Um,
Unmuted.
okay. Uh, for whatever reasons, it doesn't look like this is working. Let's do this rather than get stuck in a technical place. What we'll do is we'll send everyone the link to the video that shows this. But I'd be very happy to stay and answer any questions at all. And thank you everyone for coming. We'll send everyone a link to the YouTube video so you can check it. Yeah, yeah. Something is not going happy in GoTrue Training Land. I'm not quite sure. What is my take on Neutron? Uh, hey Marco. Okay, so I would say this. We have a VIP membership class on Fridays, and we looked at it very very carefully. Here's the thing: I'm a very big fan of Alloy 2. Alloy 2 was a huge part of a lot of big systems that I helped create for mixing and mastering. And I think Neutron has some interesting things that it can do that I like. I like the fact that you can do masking, EQ, and you can see what's happening on two different, EQs or whatever. Um, I think it's cool that you can have certain bands sidechain to other bands. I think that that's also very cool. Um, but I, I think that the limiter changed a little bit. The saturation, as far as I can tell, and I'm open to anyone else, it doesn't seem necessarily that the saturation really changed too much. I still think the saturation sounds maybe a little bit better in Ozone. They're not the same algorithms for whatever reason. Um, and okay, so I think I'm still working on Neutron, and I will have a more definite opinion. I think it's a good evolution from Alloy 2, um, but I think Alloy 2 is still pretty cool. Um, my pleasure. I think that the CQ works. I wouldn't use it. You can use it on the master bus, but I think that it's mostly useful for individual elements, and I think it's incredibly useful um, for working inside Effect Rack. Let's open up Logic here, and wow, I can't even show my screen anymore. Huh. Okay, I don't know what's going on here. So look, uh, the the cool way to use it is to go to Sound Toys, Effect Rack, and here you can build all kinds of. Yeah, I know it's not even working. Mike, can you make me presenter? Mike, could you make me the presenter? Okay. Now you can see. Okay, good. Okay, great. Then let's try just one more thing. But now you can build cool things here, and then go down to CQ and EQ your phaser, or build multiple serial effects racks, and then just have a really cool EQ. I think this is the best use, but it's really cool on kick drums. Like I said at the beginning of the webinar, the thing about boosting the low shelf sort of style with on a kick drum is that it sort of extends those very very sub low frequencies, and oftentimes we need to cut those. So you can add a lot of weight to stuff, but you may find that you want to put a low cut, sort of ultra low, after the shelf. I think the high boost is one of the best things about it. It creates incredible openness. Um, can low shelving with no, can it produce DC offset? Uh, it might produce DC offset. Usually DC offset is a more of a digital phenomenon, but it can make for very low frequencies that can eat up your headroom. And DC offset are these ultra, ultra low frequencies, usually due to strange electricity in the wall or A to D converter issues. And you can't hear the low frequency that's in your track, but it's eating up part of your headroom and preventing you from turning it up. So when you boost with this, just you may want to follow it up with a low cut because you're extending a lot of very ultra low lows. That's the point. All right, let's see if we'll try one more time here. If it will load up our video. Okay, it's working. Okay, who knows? Can everyone can you guys now see and hear the video? Okay, sick. I have no idea what happened. All right, so now let's listen to the saturation. We're going to many of you can see and hear, correct? Okay, good. So now let's listen to the saturation. We're going to overdrive it, and we're going to back off it a little bit. So here we're crunching it out on purpose. You probably wouldn't want that much crunch, but I always like to crunch something out hardcore and then sort of see what too far is and then back it off. Okay, good. I'm glad it's working for everyone. That's what's up, Shan. Now listen, yes, we're making it louder here, but we're not just making it louder. We're making it richer with the saturation. So you can see that, at 6, I don't know if it's necessarily 6 dB. It is 6 dB. What it really amounts to is hard to know. But it adds some mid-range crunch, right? But it's a pleasant saturation. That's it just as a saturator. And now let's look at it at the entire EQ here. Here is here we can see here's a sine wave, and we're running it through CQ, and here we see one little bump, right? And that is, we have our sine wave has a fundamental at 100, and the first bump is at 200, which is the even ordered harmonic. And again, we see even ordered harmonics in tubes. So now let's push more the saturation and watch the silhouette, watch the profile, the saturation profile here. And we're not going to be able to hear anything because I don't want you to have to listen to the tone. So now watch me push up the drive. Now look at those harmonics rise up in this EQ. That's a very harmonically rich EQ. And again, there's no EQ going on here, right? Just the harmonic structure. And if we can see, we got 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700. This is a blend of even and odd ordered harmonics. And if you look, it's nonlinear. It looks very different than if we look at saturation through an ozone 7 or some kind of more digital algorithm of saturation. This is actual very, physical modeling or very accurate modeling of a quirky 1960s analog EQ. And exactly, and it gets more nonlinear as you drive it. Exactly, Justin. So that is the look of CQ. Let's skip ahead to the sound here. And the first thing that we're doing here is adding that shelf. Again, it's a fixed shelf, right? So we can't adjust the frequency, but it starts its lift above the upper mids for the most part, which makes it a very non-harsh brightener. And exactly, Shan, it's got this kind of subtle air to it, but it's also, and the more trained your ears get to hear saturation, it's got a saturated high end to it. It's not a pure, clean digital FabFilter Pro Q2 shelf, right? It's got a little bit of that harmonic richness, which has a little bit of a thickening effect in the air. But it's exactly what you said, Shan. It's air without that upper mid-range harshness. That's exactly what it is. And here we are in the mid-range, pushing 1.5K, and you can see that because it's not narrow, right? We saw this in the curves. Because it's kind of wide and gentle, you can do a lot more than you could if it was narrow, right? Narrow boosts, very narrow boosts of high boosts of gain in the mid-range can hurt, right? They can hurt your ears. They can hurt. But because this has got this wide thing, it wasn't an accident. It was definitely part of the design. Because it has this width, you're allowed to boost quite a bit in the mid-range, and it sounds clear and not harsh. And getting the mid-range right, I don't care if it's up-tempo, down-tempo electronic, trap, hip-hop, country music, whatever. Getting the mid-range right is a huge part of learning EQ. and hearing right. People shy away from the mid-range all the time. And this is a wonderful mid-range control because the right amount of mid-range really makes something speak, right? So this is a really nice demonstration of a musical EQ. You know, when you're doing your boosting, you kind of add more gain than you really realistically would do. This is part of our boot camp today. You kind of exaggerate the boost, and then you just go surf around to the different frequencies until you find one that's pleasing, and then you back off the boost, right? And there's something, again, nice about fixed frequencies on an EQ. Your ear gets to hear better when you do abrupt jumps between values as opposed to a slow continuous change between values. And so musical EQs with fixed frequencies are cool because you're like, do I like this or this or this? And again, when we're boosting, we tend to exaggerate it a little bit, almost like zooming in. And then once we get to the right frequency, like adjust the gain, usually dialing it back a bit. So again, the way I would explain the CQ is that it has a tight. Some EQs are loose and they ring out a little bit. Neve EQs tend to ring out. They just have a long decay on their harmonics, and they thicken the sound by ringing out and having a long decay. Some EQs, like an SSL, tends to have a shorter decay, and we call it, or we describe it as a tighter EQ. The CQ is tight. It is tight. So now let's go to the low shelf. Again, fixed frequency, and it boosts below the mud, so you don't add mud. But it does put a big chunk of super subs in there too, that you may need to, on some sounds, cut with the low cut. Okay. Uh, I always run these things on time. I'm sorry we had a little technical glitch today. I'm glad we recovered. I'm glad everyone hung in there to see and hear CQ in action. I have it on a stereo track here, but I don't know if it's and you could use it for some mastering stuff. I think it really shines on individual elements. I think vocals is amazing. I've had really good success with guitars. Basses, you just got to watch out for that low frequency boost. You may have to follow it up with a Pro Q2 surgical cut. So just use these two together, right? Um, uh, uh, I think kick drums is good, but watch out for the super sub again. You may have to cut that again. Uh, Pianos, the mid range is wonderful. And again, this is a clean EQ, but it's not totally clean. It's got this level of saturation, even when the drive is at zero. It has some. We saw that, right? It has the first even harmonic. And then you can push it. Two workflows you can do. You can push the drive to saturate it up and then push the EQ, or you can do the opposite if you just want a light amount of saturation. All right, out of respect for everybody's time, I'm happy to stay for any questions that I can answer. I want to thank everyone for coming out today. Thank you, Mike Hooks, for putting this together. It's great to see new faces. We will email you a link to watch this again, and we'll edit out the little glitch so you can watch this webinar if you'd like to see it. And also, we have a very cool CQ YouTube video up on our YouTube now, where it shows a lot of what I showed on this webinar. But I also wanted to include some of that FabFilter reductive EQ stuff. If you're not doing enough reductive EQ in your productions, you should. Because we come back to the beginning of class. If you push up a fader and it doesn't go up, it means there's something in the way. And so first, saturation, then reductive EQ, and then it comes time to boosting. And we see from CQ, it's such a wonderful EQ for boosting. The highs boost above the mid-range, the lows boost below the mud, and the mid-range gives you some wonderful mid-range qualities, and you can run it mostly clean. It's not perfectly clean like Pro Q, or you can saturate it. So again, thank you everyone for coming out. Check out mixmasterwyatt.com. We have lots of stuff. Now let me answer some questions. Anatoly says, you mentioned I compared it with the Chandler. How does it compare? I mean, the Chandler sounds more like a scalpel. Sounds like more like a machete. They're different. I think they're different, but they're similar in the sense of, being musical vintage EQs. I think the CQ can get a little more gritty. I think the Chandler is a little bit more on the clean side. I think the Chandler is supposedly is an example of geranium transistors, which there's a big cult following around. I think that the Chandler is nice in a stereo mastering situation, but I think the CQ is going to shine for you inside the effect rack, and as a sort of more gentle high-low shelf and touch up the middle thing. There's more options in the Chandler. But if I had to describe the difference, I think the CQ has a little bit more grit. Has a little bit more grit to my ear. Shan says, would mixing in mono help? Okay, good. You agree? Good. We're hearing it the same way. Would mixing mono help? Not sure. Be listening through different speakers and monitors. Mixing in mono was a big deal in the 70s and 60s and stuff, where there was AM radio, because AM radio was broadcast in mono. And if you had something that had a phase issue like drums or vocals, if you listened in mono, you would get cancellation and things would disappear. If you had drum mics that were out of phase, when you listened on AM radio, it was like your drums were gone. So people were very concerned about building mono-compatible mixes. Also, people who make club bangers, many clubs are mono, and so they want to make sure that certain elements don't disappear if they do a Haas effect or a big widening thing. Now, if you go to Beatport and you listen to the top Beatport tracks, and they are, and you hit the mono button, you import them into something where you can mono stuff, or you can mono stuff on your system. Um, you'll notice that like big Tiesto tracks or big, you know, uh, Jack U or whoever it is, they're huge, wide stereo tracks. And when you collapse them to mono, a lot of the fun disappears, right? But so the big EDM producers on Beatport are still making extremely wide tracks. What the tactic here is that they're trying to do here is make them mono compatible on the low end, right? And we always, whenever I do a mastering for someone or I teach mastering, we will do a mono compatibility check. What we're listening for is that the low frequencies are mono compatible, because the mid range are going to sort of narrow and disappear and collapse, and a lot of the high frequency stuff is also going to disappear and collapse. But we don't want the kick drum to stop kicking, and we don't want the bass to stop bassing, because then people will stop dancing and they'll start throwing drinks and complaining, right? So if you're using the top EDM club banger producers as what is the current reality, you'll notice their tracks are not all mono compatible, but they're mono compatible on the low end. Did that make sense, everyone? Was that a good explanation? Could you follow that? Yes? Okay, good. Awesome. Other questions? Andy says, you mentioned earlier very briefly that you resolve mid problems with the de-esser. Would you use the fat filter de-esser or the new Eliosis de-esser? The three de-essers that I like are Alloy 2, back super old school Alloy 2, makes a very simple but nice de-esser. Fab Filter Pro DS, which has much more options and sounds amazing. But one of my new favorite ways to de-ess is to take Pro MB and create a de-esser out of it. Has anyone been doing that? I'll tell you why. Because you get a variable release control. It works amazing. You get a variable ratio, which you don't get in Pro DS, and I still use Pro DS. You get a variable release control, which can really smooth out de-essing in a way. And it works incredibly well as a gentle de-esser. The Eliosis thing, I downloaded the demo, I tried it out. I couldn't make it work the way I wanted it to. I think I need to spend a little more time with it. I think it's obviously very, very well engineered, but it wasn't quickly user-friendly for me. Okay, good. Did anyone have total great success with this new de-esser? I can tell they put time into it, but I just couldn't make it work for me easily. So whatever. Try it. It's obviously someone spent time engineering it. It just wasn't super easy to go. Okay, so Robert Goldsmith says, below what frequency are you monoing stuff? No, 300 is good. 300 is good, 400 is good, 200, anywhere in that zone is good. And, a lot of a lot of vinyl mastering is monoed from 200 or 300 down. So, or the needle would skip. And it kind of unifies the low end. In our mastering class, when we do stereo width adjustment with multiband tools, we'll force part of the low end to mono, but we won't always force it entirely to mono. And that seems to sound the best. That's a good crossover, 300. Good. Other questions? What did I miss? Anything else? Okay, so Shan says, Hold on. Let me see. I have to scroll up. I've been putting a lot of energy into mixing this year, and one thing I've been noticing is that your ears get used to colored mixes. For example, I don't notice having too many highs, too many lows in my mixes. I know I should be switching over to reference tracks once in a while. Okay, I think one of our students answered your question, which is two things about mixing that I think is particularly important. One, we really stress the use of reference tracks in our school. When you're a beginner and you start to compare your track to a reference track, it's like demoralizing. You're like, oh my God, I'll never get there. I don't even want to compare it to that reference track. It's hurting my feelings. Um, but as you get more intermediate, as you get more advanced, as you get more of a workflow, you begin to start to be able to compare favorably to these commercial tracks. And then they become your guide. Not that you're trying to match that exact composition, but the fact that you're trying to match that power or that energy, acoustically speaking. Until you're actually mastering, it's hard to really A/B with a mastered track because mastering is this incredible transformative process. and um, and until a track is mastered, it's hard to really do a real A/B comparison. However, when you're mixing, it's really good to take breaks and check it against a commercial master because at that point you're not trying to beat it, but you want to know, hey, my kick drum should be here, or my snare should be here, my vocal level should be here, my reverb level should be here, my saturation should be here, my width should be here, my EQ should be here. And it also starts to tell you what track should sound like in your room, right? And then the other good advice from your other webinar mate today was, and this sounds like kindergarten logic, but it's really important. Take a 5-minute break every hour or 40 minutes and walk around. Get up from your chair and walk around. My most famous favorite engineers that I got to work with, they took lots and lots of little ear breaks, even when they were tired, even when they were stressed, even when they were having a great time, even if there was a very caffeinated client behind them paying lots of money, or a A&R president paying lots of money who was also very caffeinated. It didn't matter. You have to let your ears rest. And in mastering, we even do more of it. But in mixing, we let our ears rest quite a bit. Like I said, even if you're rushing, even if you're feeling stressed, it helps you make good decisions. Thank you, man. And so, what's really funny? I just got a new Apple Watch. Whatever. I'm an Apple horror geek. There has this little cool app that reminds you to breathe, which I think is really good. And you can set it once an hour and you breathe for 3 minutes. This kind of a approach, or there's one that says get up and stand. We love music so much. We're crazy passionate about it. So we can sit there for 5 hours without getting up, looping things over and over again. But don't do that, right? Don't do that. That's a good way to make your ears tired and make really some bad decisions. So make sure you take breaks and use your reference tracks. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, exactly. No, there's lots of good little apps out there. If you have a watch, it'll tap you or your phone can light up. Take lots of little breaks. It's critical. All right, listen, I kept everyone 15 minutes late because of our little technical snafu that we managed to get past. Great to meet so many new people. Great to see all the familiar crew and faces all over the world. This is how we learn. We talk, we listen, we play, we rewind, we discuss. All of our courses at our school are just like this. So if you liked it, this is what we do. Composition, sound design, mixing and mastering will keep you in the loop. Looks like everyone wants a composition webinar, so we will let everyone know what that is. But mostly I just wanted to thank everyone for coming out today. Thank you, Mike Hooks, for putting this together. We'll email everyone so you can watch this again if you want. But come hang out at the school. We'd love to see you. You can send tracks over for personal advice. You need to book a private lesson with me. Anything you guys need. We have a live chat on our website, and it's always open. And that's the fastest response. I mean, email's fast, but you can hit us on the live chat and be like, hey, when does the next Mixing Foundations course start? Which starts next week. And this is a boot camp of EQ, compression, saturation, reverb. It's a 2-month course. We meet twice a week. And this will straighten out any bad habits you have and give you a systematic workflow for reductive EQ, additive EQ, saturation, reverb, and all the rest. So anything you need, hit us on the live chat. All right, everybody. Thank you, everybody. Great to see everyone. And I'll see you online, as I say in my letters. But I'll see you online for real. Cheers, everyone. Great to see everyone. Thank you.